They said she would never amount to anything, that she was too slow, too naive, too unworthy of love. Every cruel word her parents spoke carved invisible scars on her heart, but also built the foundation of someone they could never break. Years later, when fate turned the world upside down, those same parents who once called her useless would find themselves helpless, desperate, and clinging to the very daughter they had thrown away. Yet what she chose to do next, no one could have imagined. Emily Hart was only 8 years old when she first understood that love was not guaranteed. In her small, weathered house in Ashton Creek, Oregon, mornings began with arguments and ended in silence. Her mother, Diane, often said she wasn't as bright as other girls, while her father, Richard, looked at her with the kind of disappointment that burned more than words. Emily learned early that home wasn't a place of safety. It was a place where her heart shrank a little more each day. She used to hide behind the old oak tree in the backyard whenever voices rose inside the house. There she would press her small hands against her ears, whispering to herself that it would be over soon. Sometimes she imagined the wind carrying her far away to a place where people smiled for real. But when the yelling stopped, the silence hurt even more. Her parents didn't need to scream to make her feel unwanted. Their indifference was enough. At school, Emily tried to blend into the background. Her clothes were worn, her hair uncombed, and the other kids noticed. They laughed at the holes in her shoes and the way she flinched whenever a teacher raised their voice. No birthdays, no bedtime stories, just survival, she would later think, recalling those years. Still, beneath the sadness, a quiet fire began to flicker, a need to prove that her worth didn't depend on anyone's approval. When she brought home a picture she'd drawn in art class, proud of the colors and shapes, Richard tore it apart in front of her. "Stop wasting your time with nonsense," he shouted, his voice echoing down the hallway. Emily didn't cry that time. She simply picked up the torn pieces and hid them under her pillow. That night, as she stared at the moon through her window, she promised herself that one day she would create something beautiful that no one could destroy. The years passed slowly, each one marked by disappointment and silence. But in that silence, something unshakable took root. Every cruel word became a lesson in who she refused to be. Every insult built another layer of strength around her fragile heart. She didn't realize it yet, but her pain was becoming her foundation, the place from which her greatness would eventually rise. Sometimes, on cold nights, Emily would whisper, "One day they'll see." But deep down, she wasn't wishing for revenge. She was wishing to matter, to prove that even a child who grew up unloved could one day become someone who heals others with the love she never received. And though she didn't know it, fate had already begun to listen. By the time Emily turned 19, she had grown used to surviving on her own. She worked double shifts at a local bookstore, saved every cent, and rented a small room above a bakery in Portland. The smell of fresh bread became her morning alarm, and the city's noise replaced the silence she once feared. Her life was simple, but it was hers. And for the first time, she felt she was slowly reclaiming the control her parents had taken away. One rainy afternoon, while delivering books to a jewelry boutique next door, Emily's life quietly changed. Inside stood Margaret Collins, an elegant woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that carried both wisdom and warmth. Emily apologized for dripping rainwater onto the floor, but Margaret only smiled. "It's just water, dear." "Don't worry." That gentle tone, so different from the harsh voices of her past, caught Emily off guard. It was the first time in years someone spoke to her without judgment. Margaret began noticing the young woman who passed by her store every morning, always early, always polite. One day she struck up a conversation. "You have a calmness about you," she said, "but there's also fire in your eyes. Have you ever worked in sales?" Emily laughed nervously and shook her head. "No one's ever trusted me with something like that." Margaret's reply was simple. "Then it's time someone does." Within a week, Emily became Margaret's assistant at Collins Fine Jewelry. The boutique was small but filled with warmth. The faint scent of lavender, the soft sound of classical music playing in the background, the sparkle of gems under golden light. Margaret taught her about everything: customers, design, patience, and presentation. But most importantly, she taught her how to see value in herself. Emily started believing in her potential, one compliment and one lesson at a time. Over the next few years, their bond deepened beyond work. Margaret became the mother figure Emily had never known, offering advice, kindness, and discipline in equal measure. "You've got a gift," she would often say, "not just for jewelry, but for people." Emily poured her heart into every task, often staying after hours to perfect displays or learn design techniques. Her dedication turned heads, and soon, Margaret promoted her to manage the boutique. Customers adored her sincerity, staff respected her quiet leadership. At 25, after years of hard work and Margaret's mentorship, Emily opened her own brand, Heartlight Jewelry. The name symbolized both her pain and her transformation. Her heart, once dimmed by rejection, now a source of light for others. The grand opening was emotional. Margaret stood beside her like a proud mother holding back tears. Emily didn't just open a store. She opened a new chapter of her life, one defined not by what she had endured, but by what she had become. By 25, Emily Hart had become one of the youngest entrepreneurs in Portland. Her brand, Heartlight Jewelry, had started as a dream whispered in the silence of lonely nights and had now blossomed into a symbol of grace and resilience. People admired not only her talent but also her story, the quiet determination of a woman who turned pain into purpose. Every piece she designed carried emotion, each gem telling a story of strength and rebirth. Her boutique, tucked into a bright corner of downtown, quickly became a destination for customers seeking more than luxury. They came looking for meaning. Inside, sunlight danced across glass cases filled with rings, necklaces, and bracelets, each engraved with words like hope, faith, and healing. Emily watched strangers smile as they left the store, unaware that those same words were once the promises she had made to herself as a child hiding behind that old oak tree. The media began to notice her rise. Local newspapers featured her under headlines like "The Heart Behind Heartlight" and "The Girl Who Sparkles Through Pain." Interviews followed, but Emily remained humble. When asked about her secret to success, she always gave the same answer: kindness. That's all. She believed that business meant more than profit. It was about giving people a reason to believe again. And that belief in turn healed the parts of her she thought were gone forever. Despite the recognition, nights were still quiet for Emily. Her home was filled with trophies, awards, and framed magazine covers, but the silence sometimes felt familiar. The same silence that had haunted her as a child. She would sit by her window, gazing at the city lights, wondering if her parents ever thought about her. Not out of anger, but with a soft ache that never fully faded. Would they be proud? She sometimes whispered, knowing the answer no longer mattered. Margaret remained by her side through it all. The two often shared coffee in the mornings before opening the store. "You've built something rare," Margaret would tell her. Not just a business, a legacy. Emily smiled, grateful but thoughtful. A legacy means nothing if it doesn't help people, she replied. True to her word, she began sponsoring charity events for orphaned children and offering mentorship to young women with broken beginnings. She wanted others to see that their scars could become strength. Then one evening, as she reviewed sketches for her next collection, her phone rang. The voice on the other end trembled. It was her mother, Diane. Years had passed since their last words, yet Emily recognized the tone instantly. A mixture of fear and shame. Diane explained that her father, Richard, had been diagnosed with advanced cancer, and the treatments were too expensive. They had lost their house, their savings, everything. For the first time, Emily's parents weren't calling to criticize or belittle her. They were calling because she was their only hope. The night before visiting her parents, Emily barely slept. She sat in her living room, the city lights flickering through the windows, her thoughts heavy and tangled. Memories came rushing back. Her father's harsh voice, her mother's cold stares, the sound of paper tearing in her small hands. Yet mixed within those memories, she felt something unexpected. Peace. She wasn't the same frightened child anymore. She was a woman who had built her own world from the ruins they left behind. When Emily finally stood in front of the small run-down apartment in Ashton Creek, her hands trembled. The door opened slowly, revealing Diane, older, thinner, her eyes hollow yet filled with guilt. Behind her, Richard lay on a worn couch, his face pale, his strength almost gone. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Diane whispered, "You look just like you did when you left. Except now, you shine." Emily's throat tightened, her heart aching for the love she once begged for but never received. Her father tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the weight of years unsaid. "Emily, I was wrong. About everything." The words stumbled out like confessions that had waited too long. She sat beside him, her hand hovering above his, unsure if she was ready to bridge that distance. But then she saw the fear in his eyes, not of death, but of dying unforgiven. And in that moment, her decision became clear. Emily reached out, holding his trembling hand. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "I forgave you long ago." From that day forward, Emily became their silent guardian. She paid for her father's treatments, moved them into a better apartment, and ensured they had everything they needed. Diane often tried to apologize, her voice breaking each time, but Emily never demanded words. Forgiveness, she believed, wasn't something you earned. It was something you gave to set yourself free. And through her quiet kindness, she began healing wounds that neither time nor distance had managed to close. Months passed, and Richard's condition slowly improved. On one quiet afternoon, sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over the room. Richard looked at Emily with tears in his eyes and whispered, "You became everything we weren't." Emily smiled faintly, her heart both heavy and light. "No," she said, "I just became what I always wished we could be." In that moment, the cycle of pain ended, not with revenge, but with grace. And as she walked out of that room, Emily felt something she hadn't felt since childhood, peace that finally stayed. Emily's story reminds us that real strength isn't found in power or success. It's found in choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason not to. She could have turned her pain into bitterness, but instead she turned it into compassion. Her forgiveness didn't make her weak. It made her free. Because sometimes the most powerful way to change the story is through mercy, not revenge. And if you were moved by Emily's journey, don't miss the story on the left. about the boy abandoned by his parents who years later became their only lifeline when life turned against them.